In Caring Arms Chapter 8, A Day of Rest, numerous paintings surrounded him, as colorful as they were detailed. Shelves rose high above, framing the walls at every corner, defining a room without a single window in sight. The library was extensive, filled to the brim with scientific books of every kind. Biology, anthropology, botany, anatomy and physiology. Nothing was lacking in this place of knowledge. A grand table was before him, littered with open books, pens, papers, and many intricate writings. The lamp beside him was on, barely providing enough light for a normal person to see. But he was far from normal, needing only the smallest spark to experience sight. Musin frowned deeply as he stood, the chair behind him falling to the floor. He took one sweeping glance across his notes, the endless writings he never ceased to create. No matter how much he studied, how much he read, how much he searched for that elusive flower, he always seemed that much further away from a solution. A solution to defeating certain death. His one and only fear. The very thought of death chilled him to the bone, made him afraid and furious all at once. When he was human, even before birth, death's icy grip had been around his neck, ever ready to snatch him from this world. As a baby in his mother's womb, his heart had stopped countless times. As a newborn, he had no breath, no pulse. And as a young man, he developed a fatal illness, one that weakened him and left him in constant pain and terror, wondering when his time would come. For as long as he could remember, him and death had been locked in a mortal struggle. Even after becoming a demon, even after overcoming the human lifespan, death still lingered, taking on two forms. Demon slayers. And the sun. Musin's fist collided with his table, splitting the wood in half. Books slid to the floor, disorder filled the room as papers fluttered about, sent airborne by the force of his swing. He clenched his hands, grotesque veins bulging along his powerful body. His mind was suddenly in a haze, that unbridled rage rising in pitch. Then there was knocking, a sound that caused his fangs to lengthen and his claws to sharpen. He'd warned them. He'd warned them not to disturb him at this time, and yet, the knocking persisted, reverberating through the silent room. Musin's head snapped to the right. And he knew for a fact that he was going to kill whoever it was standing behind that door. Slowly, he began to move, eyes narrowing to slits. The banging continued. Louder. More persistent. Musin opened the door a split second away from beheading the person standing before him. Happy birthday, Father. The king of demons paused. Below, wearing a pretty little dress, was his daughter. She looked up with a bright smile. Her eyes were wide with excitement, her rosy cheeks visible despite the darkness surrounding them. In her hands was a white and black hat, which she held up expectantly. Musin's features instantly returned to normal, taking on that calm, kind expression it usually had when interacting with humans. He feigned surprise, then forced a smile across his pale features. Hanako, he whispered. What's the meaning of this? It's a present, she exclaimed happily. For your birthday tomorrow. Birthday? Must have been some made-up date he provided when he first met the mother. Musin stooped down, getting on one knee. Aren't you supposed to be sleeping? She shuffled nervously. Why yes. But I barely see you in the morning before school, and I wanted to surprise you early. Sweetheart. His tone was loving, smooth as ice. You didn't have to do this. I know, Hanako murmured. I wanted to, though. You always give me presents when you come back from those business trips. Musin picked her up, taking the hat from her hands. I can't argue with that. Thank you. Try it on. Try it on, she proclaimed. And he did. How do I look? So cool, the girl said, looking up in awe. A moment later, Rei stepped forward. And very handsome, she added. The woman, his partner, gazed upon him with a smile. She drew closer and wrapped an arm around his neck, planting a gentle kiss on his lips. It was a lingering kiss, the woman's eyes closing as she pressed her body to his. Then she pulled away, that soft smile still on her face. "You let her stay up?" asked Muzan. "Of course, Tsukiko," Rei said. She pulled him by the arm. "It's only for one night. Since she rarely sees you during the day, she wanted to spend this time with you." Rei led him deeper into the mansion, toward the dining area. As they moved through her massive abode, Muzan was reminded of why he chose to enter a relationship with this woman. Her family was wealthy old money from the Sengoku era. Thus, she had connections. Connections he could use to his advantage. Especially when procuring information concerning demon slayers and alleged locations of the blue spider lily. When they arrived at the table, he placed Hanako down, and she immediately rushed to a seat near him. A maid pulled out his chair, and Muzan sat, Rei following. The smell of human food reached his highly attuned senses. It was an odd scent, a familiar smell. Not horrible. But nothing compared to the taste of human flesh. He could stomach it, but it brought him no pleasure. Not even the slightest bit of sustenance or nutrition. But for the sake of keeping up appearances, he would humor these humans before him. So he played along, eating and chatting until midnight. By then, his daughter was falling asleep, eyes opening and closing while she tried to fight the weariness away. She blinked rapidly, nodding off as she continued to talk. "I think it's time for bed, young lady," Rei said. Hanako yawned. "But I'm not tired." "No buts. Come now. Let Momo get you out of that dress." "But I want to stay with father," she whined. Muzan forced a smile on his face. "Listen to your mother, Hana." She continued to whine, even as she was carried away by the maid dressed in a black kimono. "The meal was lovely, Rei." He stood up, wiping his hands with a cloth. "But if you'll excuse me, I'd like to return to my work." Rei stood with him, gently grabbing his arm. "Won't you come to bed with me?" He ignored that hopeful look in her eyes, and the feeling of tightness in his chest. "I'm sorry, Rei," he said sweetly. "Not tonight. I've told you how stringent my clients are, haven't I?" She thought for a moment, then nodded. Though sad, she still smiled with understanding. "All right, darling. Only for tonight. However, I won't be so easily convinced tomorrow." Rei pulled him into another long kiss, before finally letting him go. Muzan walked straight to the library, still holding the hat Hanako had gifted him. He moved past paintings and statues until he reached a grand, wooden door. Then he froze, a distinct feeling washing over him. In succession, Muzan sensed the lives of lower rank 6 and 2 come to an end. And hours later, when the sun rose, lower rank 4 died as well. All in one single night. What is happening? In caring arms the memories came as he awoke, much like a wave engulfing his mind without mercy. It flashed before his eyes. Every image. Every detail. Every sound. Their conversation. As well as her final words to him, spoken with regret, but also, with a semblance of relief. She died, and his clone stayed with her until the end. Myokugo wasn't the first demon he'd watched die. He could name a dozen times the same scenario had occurred. Just waiting until the sun burst through the night sky. Most of them yelled and screamed at his clone. Others sat in silence, angrily. A few actually seemed to consider their lives in those last moments. But the majority continued trying to eat him, even as the end approached. Myokugo had been a bit different. And though a hint of sympathy stabbed at his heart, the reality was that he couldn't save everyone. Especially those that didn't want to be saved. At least you turned out differently, he thought. Susumaru was next him, reading. Her eyelids were heavy, but she refused to fall asleep, watching over him while also keeping herself entertained. Glancing around, Naruto realized he was on a bed. Her bed, to be exact. The room was dark, the windows covered to prevent even the smallest ray of sunlight from filtering through. A single lamp was on, providing enough light for him to make out her beautiful, peaceful features. Slowly, he sat up, the weariness of yesterday completely gone. Susumaru noticed his awakening, putting her book aside. Her smile was bright, if a bit teasing. "Afternoon, sleepy," she greeted. Naruto raised his arms in a long stretch. "Hey, Susumaru." His shirt was dry, replaced during his lengthy slumber. "Guess I was a bit more tired than I thought." "That's an understatement," Susumaru replied. She pouted playfully. "You fell asleep in the middle of our conversation." He rubbed his hair sheepishly. "Sorry about that. Were we talking about something important?" She thought for a moment, frowned, then shook her head. No. Not really." Susumaru leaned forward, observing him with a hint of concern. "How are you feeling?" "Great, actually." He noticed their proximity, and the loose-fitting kimono she was wearing. The last couple of nights must have really taken their toll. But a few hours of rest were enough for him to feel completely revitalized. Then a thought struck him, something that made Naruto stiffen. "Wait," he began. "Did you say it was afternoon?" Susumaru nodded, quickly adding, "If you're worried about the patients, don't be. Yuichiro and that demon slayer woman already assessed them earlier this morning." Naruto relaxed a bit, but asked, "Why didn't someone wake me up?" "Sorry. You just seemed so tired," Susumaru apologized. "You've been staying up to watch me, and then the lower moons attacked, and there's also your project, and healing all those people. I insisted no one disturb you, and Yuichiro agreed." "Oh. Okay." Naruto felt a pleasant feeling fluttering in his stomach. Truly, he was surrounded by people that genuinely cared about him. And he found it heartwarming. "Well, if you put it that way, I can't really complain." "Thanks." "No problem, Doc." Susumaru yawned in a manner he found adorable. Since it was afternoon, she would normally be asleep at this hour, only to awake when the sun began to set. "Tired?" "Yup." She didn't deny it. "Reading this book helped me stay up though. It's just that good." Jiraiya would have loved to hear someone say that about his work, Naruto thought. Susumaru yawned again, rubbing at her beautiful amber eyes. "You mumble in your sleep," she mentioned nonchalantly. "Do I?" Naruto remarked, to which she nodded. "Hopefully, I wasn't annoying." She shook her head. "It didn't happen often. And it wasn't too loud, either. It was just that name. Hinata. You whispered it a couple of times." Susumaru looked at him curiously. "Who is that, if you don't mind me asking?" "A lover?" "A friend," he answered, unsure of why he'd said that. She was dead, though. Along with Niji and a few others the war had claimed. "Oh, okay." Susumaru shuffled silently, clenching her hands against her lap. Her cheeks suddenly reddened as she glanced at him, before quickly averting her gaze. "It's okay to ask when you want my blood, you know," Naruto assured softly. She looked at her feet. "I just don't want it to seem like I'm using you." Naruto gently flicked her forehead. "Stop. You're not using me. Just as Tamayo and Yashiro aren't using me. You're a demon. And you still need blood. So here." He pulled the covers aside, revealing his forearm. Susumaru seemed to shudder, her eyes locking with his own. She moved closer, then sat on the bed, her weight sinking the mattress slightly. Susumaru leaned in, moving further up. She tugged at the collar of his shirt, exposing his shoulder. Not his forearm this time. A different area. Somewhere closer, more intimate. She glanced at him once more, almost as if to ask, "Is this okay?" Naruto gave a single nod and she closed what little distance was left between them. Using her left arm for balance, her face remained just inches from the area between his shoulder and his neck. Finally, she lowered herself, teeth sinking into his flesh. Naruto felt a tremor run down his spine as she drew blood. She went deeper, but not enough to cause serious damage. Her eyes were shut, her body was still, and she ingested his crimson essence with a fervor unmatched by any other. Her desire wasn't desperate, nor was it ravenous, like that of a typical demon. It was gentle, lingering. It spoke of a passion for him, and only him. Naruto didn't stop her, even as her right hand came to caress his other shoulder, pulling him even closer. Unbidden, his heart began to race, and he was fully aware of the beautiful demon by his side. He glanced her way, eyes trailing every detail of that pristine, immaculate form. Her angular face. Her unblemished, ghostly white skin. And her onyx hair tinted orange at the tips. His favorite color. Susumaru drank her fill, then pulled away slowly, almost sadly not wanting to leave the warmth his body provided. She found a cloth and pressed it to his shoulder, firmly, until the bleeding stopped. "Thank you," Susumaru said breathlessly. Her features were flushed, but her eyelids seemed to droop with weariness. Naruto tilted his head. "Does doing this make you want to sleep?" At that, she yawned. Then smiled. "Not really. It just relaxes me. I'm only tired because I watched you mumble in your sleep all morning." "Oh, right." Naruto laughed softly. He got off the bed, leaving it for her to take. "Go on. You can sleep now. I'm all rested up." "You sure?" she asked tiredly. Her kimono was especially gorgeous in the dimly lit room. "Positive." So she conceded and laid down, a satisfied look on her face. "I appreciate you keeping me company, by the way." Susumaru waved him off as he opened the door to leave, another yawn on her lips. "Anytime, Naruto." He gently closed her door, then walked through the hallway. His heart still thudded his chest, that feeling of closeness lingering in his mind. He didn't know what to make of it. The gentle way she'd held him. The way she'd felt against his body. And the way her eyes seemed to light up when talking to him. The scene continued to play in his head, even as he paused at the door that housed his sealing jutsu. In that moment, Naruto was reminded of the fact that he would not be in this world forever, and that any feelings he was starting to experience weren't allowed to blossom lest those involved end up hurt when it was time for him to leave. So he pushed those thoughts aside, forced them into the deepest recesses of his mind, as he finally made his way upstairs. While not as hectic as last night, his clinic was still at full capacity. So much so that they'd had to bring in new, unused medical beds from a storage area in the basement. I bet Sakura would be shocked to see this place, Naruto thought wistfully. As he moved forward, Naruto felt the familiar sensation of a cat. He looked down, greeted by the sight of Kimiko. She rubbed up against him, purring with her tail held high. He reached down to stroke her fur, the rumbling in her throat rising in volume. After a few moments of petting, his cat departed, padding down the stairs presumably to Susumaru's room. Kimiko really likes her. When Naruto entered the main area, everyone stopped to look at him. Most were on their beds, reading or talking. He waved and they all waved back, many of them greeting him with smiles and thanks and shouts of good afternoon. Naruto stopped by a few patients, in which he gave them a quick assessment. Truth be told, they were doing fine. Many of them looked far healthier than they did last night. He made a mental note to thank Yuichiro and Shinobu for their efforts while he'd been asleep. Next, he went to see his most critical patient, one of the few that had been brought to the clinic from a nearby hospital. She was sleeping, but her dressings were fresh, minimal blood coating the bandages around her arms and legs and neck. Naruto drew closer, then continued the healing process with hands outstretched, chakra flowing into her most serious wounds. He made sure to focus on her trachea, damaged by biting, snapping teeth. Once finished, he continued through the house, the smell of food suddenly reaching his nostrils. Naruto made his way toward the massive kitchen. To his surprise, both Jiro and Yuichiro were there, cooking up meals for everyone in the clinic. "That smells incredible," he announced, crossing his arms as he stood at the entrance. Both of them paused, then turned to face him. "Doctor!" Jiro exclaimed, smiling from ear to ear. "That's me," Naruto said with a grin. "Now this is a sight to behold." The man added a bit of seasoning to the food he was boiling. "I did promise to make you something. So, here I am. It's not ramen, but I think you'll like it just as much." "I'll be the judge of that," said Naruto. He moved closer, just enough to inspect the contents of the pots being used. "You're in an awfully good mood. More so than usual." Yuichiro pinned him with a curious look. "How are you feeling?" "Better than ever," the blonde said, cracking his knuckles. "Seriously, though? I just needed a bit of rest, that's all." The teen nodded slowly, then returned to cooking. "I've never seen you sleep for that long, so I was a bit concerned. Still, if you say you're okay, I'll believe you. But take it easy today, okay?" "Sure, Yui, since you're so worried about me." Naruto tousled the teen's beautiful, turquoise-tinted hair. "I hear something big went down last night," said Jiro. He stirred the pot with a large spoon. "If all these new patients aren't an indication, I don't know what else is." Naruto regarded the man for a moment, considering his next words. "I already told him some details," Yuichiro spoke first. "Even about the demons?" The teen nodded. "So Naruto said, then you're aware that one of the demons involved was the one that attacked your home and killed your wife?" "Yeah," whispered Jiro. "But you got rid of him though, right?" "I did," Naruto answered firmly. "I made sure of it too." The man took a deep breath, a look of relief on his face. "Then I can rest easy, knowing that my wife has been avenged." He glanced at Naruto with a small, sad smile. "Things will always be different now that she's gone, but I'm glad you took care of the situation." "Thank you." They resumed cooking, chatting for several minutes more. When Naruto decided it was time to leave, Yuichiro stopped him, a hand gently gripping the hem of his shirt. "Two things," Yuichiro began. "Ozaki and Murata. They still need you to check on their wounds. Their injuries aren't horrible, but I'm sure they would appreciate your help." The teen paused, considering what he was going to say next. "Also, when you have the time, I'd like to tell you something important. About my brother." Naruto leaned forward. "Your brother?" Yuichiro's smile was happy, yet tentative. "Yeah. But don't worry about that for now. Please help those two first." "Sure," Naruto said, his curiosity rising. But he respected his student's wishes and pried no further. "Where's Miss Coco, by the way? I haven't seen her yet." "She went out to get supplies for when she returns to headquarters, or something." The teen shrugged. He returned to cooking, and Naruto began to make his way upstairs. Before he did, however, the blonde paused at the front door, catching sight of Kaneo. Like last night, she was sitting on the porch, staring into the distance as she observed his garden. She didn't have her sword with her, not at the moment, because he had put them in a safe place just in case she or Shinobu tried anything. It was just a precaution, nothing malicious, and surprisingly, Shinobu had agreed. Kaneo seemed to be doing okay, so Naruto moved on, climbing up the stairs. Up here, there were more rooms, one of which housed the first demon slayers he'd encountered in Tokyo. Pausing at the door, he knocked softly, waited, then entered the room. "Afternoon, you two," he said. Each on a separate bed, both of them greeted him in return. I haven't seen you out of your uniforms before." Naruto walked in. He stood at a sink, thoroughly washing his hands. Murata chuckled, rubbing his hair. "I know. Feels like I'm always wearing it. I can't remember the last time I wore something else during the day," Ozaki added as Naruto moved closer. "Well, you certainly look different. More relaxed, in a way." He began with Ozaki, pulling a stool beside her bed. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded, extending her arm so Naruto could unwrap the blood-saturated bandages. "Thanks to Yuichiro's medication, yeah. That's good to hear." Naruto focused, then released his chakra into her wound, a vicious bite. Afterward, he moved on to her forehead, where a deep cut could be seen. He healed that area as well, much quicker than he would have last night. Naruto went to Murata next. His injuries were worse than Ozaki's, but still treatable within a span of 10 minutes. He also checked to see if the teen's ribs were broken, assessing his lungs in the process. Finding nothing out of the ordinary, Naruto clasped both hands together. "You're all good now," he said. "I appreciate you two waiting so that the other patients could be taken care of first." "Of course," said Murata, a proud look in his eyes. "We're demon slayers. A little pain is nothing." Naruto chuckled and stood up, wrapping fresh bandages around what was left of their injuries, which wasn't much. He'd return to inspect them again in a few hours, though. With that, Naruto bid them farewell, intent on taking a long, warm bath. Later Shinobu walked along the city street, a bag strewn around her shoulder. By now, it was heavy, stuffed to the brim with medical supplies found only in Tokyo. She'd been at this for an hour or so, moving from store to store, from pharmacy to pharmacy, stocking up on things that weren't as easily accessible near the countryside. Mind-focused, she barely registered the fact that she'd traveled past Nerima and entered Nakano, a place considerably more developed than the former ward. Still, she pressed on, searching for medications she could add to her collection back at headquarters. As Shinobu continued through the city, thoughts of last night continued to fill her mind. Images of that battle. Images of a certain blonde and his demon friend. And of course, images of Yuichiro Tokaido, the twin brother of her fellow Mist Hashira, Muichiro. To think, Muichiro had a brother. A twin, no less. It was baffling to her. While many of the Hashira liked to keep to themselves, they still knew quite a bit about each other. Everyone knew her sister, Connie, for instance. But the Mist Hashira having a brother? Not even a word of it had been said. Well, in Muichiro's defense, he was very young, and he never really fit in with the rest of them, part of that due to age. And he had certain problem with remembering things. But still, this was big news. One she would be sure to carry with her on the return trip back to headquarters. Shinobu turned at a street corner, finding a relatively small pharmacy with moderate amounts of customers. She paused to inspect the contents being sold, then nodded to herself. The prices weren't outrageous, and the medicine was of a higher quality. So, she decided to stay, sifting through materials and tools she could bring back with her. Once again, her mind drifted to the blonde doctor. Even now, Shinobu could hardly believe she'd decided to stay with him, considering the fact that he housed a demon. But the thought of getting him on the Demon Slayer Corps side had been so irresistible that she would have been a fool to refuse his offer. Not only that, though. There was something about him, something familiar in that blue gaze. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. But it was enough to arouse her interest. I wonder how he'll react once I ask him to join the Corps, she thought. Finally, she gathered all the supplies she wanted and went to pay. The owner was an older gentleman, dressed in a gray yukata. He looked through her selection, calculated the price, then helped her put them in a small basket. "Thank you, sir," Shinobu said with a bright smile. "You have a very nice store. Much better than the others around here." "I appreciate that, young lady." The man dipped his head once, handing her the recently purchased supplies. "You be careful, all right? There's been some strange things happening around here. Wouldn't want someone so young getting caught up in trouble." Her smile brightened. "I'll take that into consideration." Shinobu departed. By now, it was well past noon. So she made her way back toward Naruma, bag of supplies even heavier. Instead of going around the scene of yesterday's initial attack, she went toward it, steering through the crowd that had been here since morning. Most of them were curious onlookers. Some were reporters, taking pictures and writing notes. Others were police officers, keeping the people at bay. Shinobu paused just outside the ring of onlookers. She observed the damaged street, sharp eyes finding claw marks and blood stains on the road. To her left, an entire building had been cut in half. To her right, another building had collapsed, a human-shaped hole in the entrance. "He really fought all three of them at once," she remarked. Shinobu almost chuckled. A single lower moon wasn't the most difficult battle a Hashira could face. But three at once? With unknown abilities to boot. Coupled with a hostage situation. Even she would have struggled, and most likely would have been given life-threatening injuries. "Just who are you, Naruto Uzumaki?" Shinobu's gaze snapped forward, past the crowd, toward two people she instantly recognized. A smile curled across her lips. She sprinted forward, invisible to normal humans, and appeared in front of them, a rush of wind signaling her arrival. "So you're here too?" Shinobu asked happily. Both women jumped, startled by her sudden arrival. They tensed, hands reaching for their kunao, until recognition flickered across their features. It was Suma and Makio, two of the Sound Hashira's three wives. "LL Lady Coco!" Suma exclaimed, eyes growing to the size of dinner plates. I can't believe it." Makio, look." She tugged at her fellow wife's arm. "It's Lady Coco." Makio's brow twitched. "I know, Suma," she deadpanned. "I see her right in front of me." Suma rubbed her onyx hair sheepishly, even as Shinobu looked upon them with amusement. "My word," she remarked. "You two never change." Makio lowered her head in respect. And seeing that Suma hadn't done the same, she lowered her fellow wife's head with a swift hand. Suma yelped innocently, quickly bowing as well. "Greetings, Lady Coco," Makio began. "It's a pleasure to see you here in Tokyo." "Likewise." Shinobu pulled her bag tighter. She soon noticed the Kashigi crow on Makio's shoulder. "I'm assuming you received the message concerning last night's attack." "Yes, ma'am," Suma replied. "This little bird flew all the way to our home. It told us about the situation. And even though I was tired and hungry, and I didn't really feel like coming," Makio sent her a non-malicious glare. "We still gladly traveled through the night to get here," she added quickly. Shinobu asked, "Then Tenjin is here as well?" "Yes," Makio answered this time. "He and Hinatsuru are investigating the forest outside the city. We can go find him if you wish." No. That won't be necessary." Shinobu stretched out a hand, and Ozaki's crow flew to her. "In fact, there's nothing to worry about at all." Makio cocked a brow. "But the 12 Kazuki that attacked. 2 of them have already been killed," Shinobu revealed. A pause. What a relief," blurted Suma, before she froze. I mean, I'm grateful the situation has been handled." "Is this true, Lady Coco?" Makio inquired. Even she looked relieved. "Absolutely," Shinobu said cheerfully. "Save for one, me and a certain doctor were able to kill them. A doctor? Suma echoed. In any case, this is good news, Makio interjected. Tenjin will want to hear about this. Shinobu nodded knowingly. Oh, I'm sure he will. Ozaki's crow found his way to her shoulder as she pulled out a slip of paper and wrote something against the wall of a building. These are directions. When you see Tenjin, tell him to come to this place if he gets the chance. That's where I'll be staying for a few days. Makio took the paper, then bowed her head, Suma doing the same. Thank you for the information, Lady Coco, Makio said. We'll pass this along to him as soon as possible. Take care, then, ladies, Shinobu said happily. She began walking away, waving over her shoulder. Given the severity of the situation, it was no surprise to her that another Hashira was now involved. Shinobu glanced at the crow on her shoulder. She reached up to pet him, fingers running through black feathers. He squawked loudly, obviously pleased by her actions. Oh, my. You're a noisy one, aren't you, she said. Nevertheless, I appreciate your efforts. What would the Demon Slayer Corps do without you and the other crows helping us? She bought him a snack, which he quickly devoured, before heading back to the clinic. By the time she arrived, Naruto's garden was alight with activity. Children, once injured, were out and about. They ran and played, giggling happily, their delighted shouts filling her ears. Other patients, still in hospital attire, sat on the porch or near the pond. They each had a meal in hand, eating and talking as a gentle wind blew. It ruffled Shinobu's hair, bringing with it a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. Peace. She felt a small smile tug at her lips, a genuine smile. Shinobu found Kaneo standing near the pond, staring into the water. She drew near and put a hand on her student's shoulder. The koi are quite beautiful, aren't they? Kaneo nodded once, then continued her observation of the colorful fish. So Shinobu left her to it, intent on finding Naruto. She entered the clinic and saw Yuichiro, Ozaki, and Murata talking. Shinobu stopped by them, handing Ozaki her Kajigai crow. The teen beamed and hugged her bird closely. Sara, she said happily. You did such a good job yesterday. Her bird cooed, flapping his wings at the praise. Shinobu turned to Yuichiro. Do you know where Dr. Uzumaki is? He looked just like Muichiro, especially the way he cocked his head to the side. He's upstairs, I think. Nodding, she made her way there. And when she arrived, Shinobu was immediately greeted by the sight of the blonde doctor. He was in one of the unlocked rooms, hair glistening like the sun. He had a towel on his head, which he used to dry his golden locks. He was also shirtless, his defined physique on full display. Her eyes trailed his body subtly, mapping out every bump and curve of muscle, etched into his tan torso. Broad shoulders. A powerful back. Lean, yet noticeable brawn. He was quite handsome too, she mused. And those whiskered cheeks added to his strange, yet alluring appeal. Pardon me, Shinobu said, masking her interest with an innocent smile. She turned to leave the room, but he waved her off. Don't worry about it. Naruto rubbed his hair some more. Were you looking for me? Yes, I was. Shinobu tore her eyes away from his chest. What's the situation with the last lower moon? She's dead, Naruto answered, throwing the towel over his shoulder. The memories of my clone came to me earlier today. The insect Hashira only shook her head, a gentle laugh on her lips. Well, I can't say I'm surprised. But your abilities never cease to fascinate me. She paused, then said, I ran into some of my subordinates in town. Naruto groaned playfully. More of you guys. She smirked. And I apologize for not talking to you first, but I asked that they stop by the clinic for a chat. If you disapprove, I'll make sure they don't set foot in here. Naruto frowned. I don't want another fight, you know. I'm aware. I'll make sure nothing happens, she said sincerely. I only want to talk and have one of them meet you. But only if you want. As long as you don't mention Susumaru, they're free to come here, Naruto answered. That's perfectly acceptable. Late afternoon, almost everyone was outside. Save for the woman with the vicious bites, the former hostages and those brought in from the hospitals walked about, enjoying the scenery Susumaru had recently cultivated. For someone who wasn't an expert gardener, she certainly did a fine job. The children still played and ran. Keiko, who recently had an amputation, also moved around, already accustomed to her artificial limb. Now, Naruto was no expert on prosthetics, but Yuichiro certainly was. The teen had a talent even he couldn't fathom, despite lacking arm himself. He'd made this device for the girl, and Naruto honestly thought it was an amazing piece of engineering. With documentation completed, Naruto could finally relax. He left the clinic with a warm bowl of soup in hand. Finding Kaneo sitting on the porch, Naruto handed her the food. She stared at him for a moment, flipped a coin, then accepted the meal. Thank you, Kaneo said flatly. Naruto arched a brow, but said nothing, figuring that it wasn't his place to pry, or try to analyze her eccentric behavior. When the sun began to set, Yuichiro found him lounging under a tree. Arms behind his head and eyes closed, Naruto noticed his student long before the teen even spoke. Do you have a minute, Naruto? Sure do, he answered, patting a spot next to him. Come on, take a seat. Yuichiro complied and found a place beside him. They sat in silence for a time. Not an awkward kind of quiet, but the comfortable kind. Both of them watched the sun sinking in the distance, painting the clouds red. Even Shinobu was looking up. The insect Hashira was seated on a bench. She was writing something, paper still in hand. Most likely that report she'd mentioned. Miss Coco is very strange, Yuichiro commented. Naruto chuckled. Agreed. But she's also very caring. And certainly not as strange as you, he added, to which Naruto rolled his eyes. She said she's willing to take me back to the Demon Slayer headquarters. Naruto crossed his arms, the gears in his head turning. Is this about your brother? Yeah. The teen shuffled. He's alive, Naruto. And he's a Demon Slayer. Really? Yui. That's incredible news. The grin on Naruto's face was wide and beaming, more so than usual. I'm happy for you, kid. I am too. So happy, Yuichiro said. Then he frowned, doubt coloring his gaze. But, should I go meet him? Naruto looked at him as though he'd grown a second head. Yes. What kind of question is that? Yuichiro rubbed his turquoise locks. I don't know, he said, a hint of frustration in his voice. I mean, I want to see him again. So badly. But what would he think of me after all these years? I was so cruel to him, Naruto. And it was out of some misguided attempt to protect him. He sighed. I just don't know what to do. I say you go see him anyway, no matter what you're feeling. That way, you'll have no regrets, Naruto asserted. He leaned forward, turning to face his student. I never told you his, but I'm an orphan. For as long as I can remember, I also wanted a family. A father. A mother. A sibling. Anything. Of course, I don't really think that way anymore because I've met great people that I now consider family. But still, if I were you, if someone told me a member of my family was still alive, I would at least try to see them. Yuichiro mulled over his words, sighing. I need to think about this some more. Naruto patted him on his back. Take your time. Several minutes passed, and Susumaru emerged from the clinic, Kimiko padding alongside her. The sun had finally set, lights around his clinic also shined brighter. Coupled with the moonlight, his garden was bathed in a dreamlike glow, the koi pond reflecting that glistening celestial body above. As soon as she arrived, Susumaru stole the show. She quickly made friends with the children, her jolly personality meshing well with their own. She played with them, inventing all sorts of games as they clambered on her back or hung from an arm. "She's really changed," Yuichiro murmured next to him. Naruto nodded, gazing upon her fondly. "Yeah." Susumaru then summoned a tamari, and the children immediately began to play with it, passing the colorful ball amongst themselves. A distance away, Shinobu stiffened. Her eyes had been on the demon the entire time, just waiting for her to make a move against the people here. The insect Hashira reached for a sword that wasn't there, one of the conditions for staying at the clinic, before remembering her weapon was being kept upstairs as a show of good faith. She still watched Susumaru, though. Her gaze suspicious, yet curious. As time went on, the children tired themselves out and returned to their parents. But Susumaru continued to keep them entertained, kicking her ball up and down, performing various tricks with her feet alone. Which gave Naruto an idea. "Miss Coco," he called. She tilted her head. "Yes, doctor." Naruto stood from his place under the tree. "Care for a little game?" It was a Western game recently brought to Japan by European visitors. Naruto had learned about it while talking to clients over the past few months. It was relatively simple, easy to play, and very competitive. 2 goals. 1 person to defend each goal. And various players on the field, each trying to shoot the ball into said goal. The only catch. Save for the goalkeeper, one couldn't use their hands to handle the ball. Intrigued and having little of importance to do, Shinobu agreed with that ever-present smile. Naruto made makeshift goals by cutting large branches from the trees around the garden, then stabbing them into the ground. Next, they formed 2 teams. And naturally, it ended up being the demon slayers comprised of Shinobu, Kaneo, Murata, and Ozaki against Naruto and Susumaru. Naruto created a clone to be the goalkeeper, so things could resemble a somewhat fair game. So, 3 against 4. Susumaru grinned at the opposing team. "You guys are going down." With the ball in the center, the game began. Shinobu shot forward, intercepting the tamari before Susumaru. Even though it was her first time playing, she quickly grew accustomed to controlling the ball with her feet. She approached the goal in a split second, but Naruto was there to intercept, stealing the tamari from her. He passed it to Susumaru, who launched the ball at incredible speeds toward Kaneo, who was guarding the opposing team's goalpost. Despite her youth, Kaneo was incredibly powerful. Without a shift in expression, she caught the tamari with ease, then returned it to the field. Ozaki got the ball, running with it, then passed to Murata. This time, Susumaru managed to steal the ball from him. But instead of taking another shot, she kicked it high into the air. And instantly later, Naruto jumped dozens of meters upward. The patients gasped with amazement at such a superhuman feat. Naruto kicked the ball. A sonic boom followed, and it blurred through the air, passing the goal before Kaneo could save it. "So we can do that as well?" asked Shinobu. Naruto grinned. "I never said you couldn't." What ensued next was a game the patients would talk about for years to come. A game of supersonic tamari balls streaking across the garden, and of human beings performing unbelievable acts of strength that left the spectators laughing and cheering from a safe distance. Finally, it came to an end. Even though they were outnumbered, Naruto and Susumaru still won, completing the game with a commendable display of teamwork. By now, most of the patients had retired to their beds, with Naruto doing one last assessment on them before returning to the garden. Finishing her report about the events in Tokyo, Shinobu put away the papers she'd been writing on. She stood up, looked around, and found Naruto on the roof of his home. He sat with his legs crossed, his eyes closed, and his body still. She leapt forward, then gently landed beside him. He didn't react at first, so she remained silent, taking a seat as he continued to meditate. Glancing at him, she noticed that an orange ring now surrounded eyes, and that his presence seemed even more pronounced than earlier. Must be another technique, she mused. After a time, he opened his eyes, releasing the natural energy from his body. The orange ring also disappeared, and he turned to face her. "Watching me?" he inquired. Shinobu didn't falter, crossing her legs as well. "Perhaps. Out of curiosity, of course." She leaned back, supporting herself with both arms. "What were you doing?" "Appreciating nature," Naruto answered. Unbeknownst to her, however, he'd been in sage mode trying to find that perfect balance, that peaceful feeling his technique brought. This world was different, in the sense that the people here had no chakra flowing through their bodies. They had physical and spiritual energy, sure, but lacked the necessary physiology to combine those energies into one. Thus, when he stretched out his senses in sage mode, he could hardly tell the difference between the people around him. They all felt the same, having no unique energy signature formed by their individual chakra coils. However, one thing this world did not lack was natural energy. It was incredibly abundant, untapped by both humans and animals. "You've built something wonderful here," Shinobu commented in that happy tone. Naruto glanced downward. Though most of the patients were inside with Yuichiro, some still lingered, talking. Even Susumaru, Ozaki, and Murata were talking. Tentatively at first, but they seemed to have grown a bit more comfortable with each other. "Yeah. This place is my pride and joy." He turned to her. "By tomorrow, about half of the patients will be discharged." She nodded slowly. "I agree with that decision. Your healing abilities are truly remarkable. Many of them would have died were it not for you." "I appreciate the praise, Miss Coco." Shinobu shifted, a cheerful smile on her face. "Feel free to call me Shinobu if you want." "Not Lady Shinobu," he teased. She shook her head. "I was never really fond of such titles." "Makes me feel old," he finished, to which she nodded. "I feel the same way about Yuichiro calling me sensei for some reason. I'm only 19, for goodness sake." Her smile widened, and Shinobu thought that maybe she was becoming a bit too comfortable with the man she should be suspicious or at least wary of. "In that case, you can call me Naruto as well," he continued. "Deal." Shinobu looked up, watching stray clouds as they moved across the starlit sky. "I must admit, I haven't taken a break like this in years. I don't remember the last time I played a game, either. It was nice. Everyone needs a break sometimes." Naruto rubbed his hair sheepishly. "Though, I'll be honest. I don't always follow my own advice. I'm always working, even when I shouldn't be." Shinobu agreed. As the head medical specialist at headquarters, she hardly ever stopped to enjoy life, nor did she take a day of rest. "You mentioned you weren't from Japan," she said. Naruto nodded, and she asked, "Where are you from then, the West?" He shook his head. "Not the West, but a different continent entirely. It's a place you've never heard of. A city, more specifically, covered by a dense forest that extends for more than 100 kilometers. That sounds quite remarkable." She observed him closely. "I can certainly see it, though the fact that you're not from Japan. For one, your clothes are a bit different. And your features. Something about them also seems different." "Huh. I thought I did a good job of blending in." "Is it that noticeable?" Naruto asked. Shinobu beamed. "Very." She was only teasing him, but Shinobu was right in a way. Even though they were both human, Naruto noticed some differences between them. Subtle, but still noticeable. And it was mainly the eyes. He didn't know what it was about the people in this world, but many of them possessed very striking eyes. Especially Shinobu. By the way, Naruto began offhandedly, why do you always do that? Shinobu tilted her head, that same smile on her face. Do what? He pinned her with a stare. Smile even when you're so angry. His words froze her in place, her eyes widening. And immediately, Shinobu's whole facade fell apart. You noticed? I did. Not only could he sense the negative emotions pouring off of her, he could also see through those fake smiles and forced laughs. Then you're even more perceptive than I thought. She looked down, a deep sadness in her violet orbs. You're correct, Naruto. I am angry. Naruto watched her, his gaze softening. At who? The insect Hashira took a breath. In that moment, she seemed far older than 18 years of age. At demons, because of all the suffering they've caused. All the grief. All the death, she whispered. But none of that compares to the anger I hold, toward myself. Naruto's attention remained on her, and she continued. My sister, she was a demon slayer. One of the most powerful around. Yet even she was killed, and I wasn't strong enough to help her, to stand by her side as she faced that monster, Shinobu hissed. I hate demons with a passion. It's a hatred so deep that even I'm surprised by it. She glanced downward toward Susumaru, who was feeding the koi. But now, I'm conflicted. I'm not like my sister, no matter how much I pretend to be. Connie would be thrilled to meet Susumaru. Because she was kind, loving, always smiling, and she had sympathy for demons. So you smile to keep her memory alive, Naruto said gently. Yes. Shinobu nodded. But also, to keep the anger, the sadness, all of it, at bay. She didn't know why she was telling him this, but the words just kept coming and coming. Years of pent-up feelings were being released in these tender moments, and she wasn't sure whether to feel ashamed or relieved. But I'm tired now. So tired, she whispered, and Naruto realized that he wasn't looking at the insect Hashira of the Demon Slayer Corps, but at a young woman saddled by so much responsibility. I understand, Shinobu. I really do. He looked forward. Because I'm just like you. Shinobu turned to him, a curious desperation on her face. A desperation to have someone she could relate to. I'm not a typical human being, as you've noticed, Naruto began. Even among my own people, I'm different. As a child, I was shunned for this difference. I was hated. Despised for something I didn't do. For something I had no control over. And like you, I smiled. All the time. I smiled until it hurt. I smiled to cope, and to show the people around me that they couldn't hurt me. He glanced her way, tenderly, empathetically. I've gotten over this habit for the most part. But sometimes, I still do it. I still smile when I shouldn't. Shinobu hung on to his every word. And I have to remind myself that it's okay to feel anger, or sadness, or loss. It's okay to feel tired, he said, then rubbed his spiky mane. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but I just want you to know that you're not alone, Shinobu. We're the same. The insect Hashira looked down, pulling her legs into her chest. I'm not alone, huh? Of course not, he said. Still looking down, Shinobu smiled. A real, genuine smile. It was small, barely curling the edges of her lips. Naruto. I think I needed to hear that. We all do, every once in a while, Naruto said with a smile of his own. Something changed in that moment, something Shinobu couldn't quite discern. But she quickly realized why she had found Naruto so fascinating. Because both of them were quite similar. You were despised by your own people, the insect Hashira ventured. Naruto frowned. Unfortunately. But things got better as I grew older. It sounds like there's a story behind this, Shinobu said, interest growing. Naruto crossed his arms. Yup. A long story. Shinobu leaned closer. Now I really want to find out more about the mysterious man beside me. You can try, Naruto replied mischievously. But I'm not an easy nut to crack. Shinobu let out a gentle laugh, and Naruto thought that it sounded quite beautiful. Even after I told you my story? That's no fair, Naruto. Eventually, they slipped into a comfortable silence. Just listening to the wind as it rustled the leaves of a tree. In that moment, a small branch fell, striking Susumaru on the head. The demon yelped adorably, turning around in circles to see what hit her. Naruto chuckled. And Shinobu looked at her with a soft gaze. I don't trust her yet, she admitted. But Susumaru gives me hope that my sister's dream can become reality. That maybe we can actually get along with demons, like she so desired. The insect Hashira then stood, stretching her arms. Today had been a nice day. She should be patrolling the area near Nerima, but with Tenjin around, she felt more at ease with the idea of resting for one night. I enjoyed our talk, Shinobu said sincerely, her smile warm and kind. I'm relieved that I found someone who understands me. She leapt down from the roof, a rush of wind left in her wake. So Naruto leaned forward and cast his gaze upon this place, his home. That which he had cultivated in a span of 3 years. It was beautiful, calming, and it made him happy. Do I really want to go back? He whispered. The question echoed in Naruto's mind, even as he continued to meditate, closing his eyes, and letting nature in. Midnight, the balcony doors were open. Muzan could feel the breeze as it wafted into the bedroom. It was gentle, soft against his pale skin. The moon also shined. Almost like the sun. But not quite the same. Arai snuggled up against him, her bare chest pressed into his side. She shuffled in her sleep, an arm wrapped tightly around his waist. Her warmth was intense, especially beneath the covers. He'd given her what she desired, a passionate night in bed. If Muzan wanted to keep using her and her family's connections, then these obligations were necessary. It wasn't a foreign concept to him. After all, he'd been living among humans for a millennium. As such, he knew that certain activities were required to keep intimate relationships alive. No matter what form he took, whether that of a man, or a woman, his partners always craved this closeness that he no longer needed as a demon. Several minutes passed before he gently untangled himself from Arai's arms. She moaned in protest, but stayed asleep. He watched her, the thought of devouring her crossing his mind. But he refrained from doing so. Instead, he pulled the soft covers over her body. Muzan then walked onto the balcony outside, where he could see the humans walking below. The demon snapped a finger, and someone appeared, head bowed at the feet of his master. Muzan spared the new arrival a single glance. "Where is your partner?" he questioned. Yahuba froze, a chill of fear running through him. I don't know, master. She's been gone for a few." Silence. Yahuba shut his mouth. "You will not waste my time if you don't have an answer," Muzan said coldly. "You can find her at another time. For now, I have an assignment for you. Head to Nerima and observe the area, discreetly. Find out why I'm hearing reports of an attack by wild animals. Return quickly and tell me what you see." "Why, yes, master." Yahuba departed, appearing to vanish into thin air. Muzan crossed his powerful arms, observing the expansive area below. Getting to Nerima would be easy for him. But he didn't want to expose himself unnecessarily. Not while demon slayers were potentially prowling about. With that thought, a memory flashed before his eyes, showing the one time he had almost been killed by a demon slayer. "Yoriichi," he thought distastefully. 3 members of the 12 Kazuki dying at once had never occurred in the hundreds of years they'd existed even among the lower ranks, and Muzan wanted to know just what happened yesterday night. End.